There are bodies orbiting Earth right now. Frozen, silent, still wearing their suits. Space doesn't scream, it doesn't warn, it just takes.
5, 3, 2, 1, 0, and liftoff of Space Shuttle Atlantis.
Behind every countdown, behind every launch, is a quiet gamble hidden in fuel lines, aging seals, and human bones. These are the transmissions that ended mid-sentence, the faces that disappeared from history, the coldest deaths you've never heard of. This is the space deaths iceberg, and we're only at the surface. Level 1. Apollo 1. This wasn't space. It wasn't even a flight. It was a test. On the ground, what was supposed to be a routine simulation turned into a sealed tomb of fire. January 27th, 1967. The Apollo program was NASA's crown jewel, a mission to put a man on the moon. But before that leap could happen, there had to be tests, routine checks, and rehearsals. Inside the Apollo 1 capsule sat 3 astronauts, Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee. They were all decorated and proud. They strapped in for a plugs-out test, simulating launch conditions while connected to ground support. The command module was pressurized with pure oxygen. The hatch was sealed, and the atmosphere inside was flammable. At 6:31 p.m., a small, invisible spark ignited the oxygen-rich air. In less than 15 seconds, the fire turned the capsule into a furnace. They screamed for help. Voices crackled over comms. "We've got a fire in the cockpit." Then, static.
Fire in the cockpit.
Outside the capsule, technicians tried everything, but the hatch was locked with multiple bolts. It wasn't built for speed. By the time they got it open, it was over. All 3 astronauts were burned alive. The heat was so intense that their pressure suits melted into their skin. They had no time to escape, no time to even unbuckle. Gus Grissom had once said, "If we die, we want people to accept it. We are in a risky business." But this was never supposed to happen. Sometimes the deadliest place is the one you think is under control. Challenger. It was supposed to inspire a generation. Instead, it traumatized one. On January 28, 1986, the world watched as 7 astronauts boarded the space shuttle Challenger. Among them was Krista McAuliffe, a teacher, a mother, a civilian with a smile that made headlines, chosen from over 11,000 people to carry the dreams of every classroom in America.
Good morning. This is Krista McAuliffe, live from the Challenger, and I'm going to be taking you through a field trip.
Schools across the U.S. tuned in to witness history. Her students sat on classroom floors, faces glowing with excitement. 11:38 a.m., the sky was perfect. The countdown echoed through classrooms. Cheers, laughter. No one knew that within 73 seconds, every smile would vanish. But behind the celebration, an invisible flaw was already ticking down. A single rubber O-ring cracked from the cold. Superheated gas escaped. A chain reaction began. Unseen, unstoppable. A fire pierced the external tank. The entire shuttle was engulfed in a massive fireball. To millions watching live, it looked like the spacecraft had simply vanished. But that wasn't the end. The crew compartment was detached from the explosion, but it was still whole. It didn't explode. It didn't burn. It fell out of the sky. Inside the cockpit, emergency oxygen systems were activated. At least 3 astronauts were still conscious. They flipped switches, they tried to stabilize, They were alive for nearly 3 minutes as the wreckage plunged back to Earth. They likely felt the G-forces, the sickening drop, the helplessness. The cabin hit the Atlantic Ocean at over 200 miles per hour. The force was instantly fatal. But those minutes before, that was true horror. Not the explosion, not the fire, the weight. Challenger wasn't just a tragedy, it was a broadcast nightmare. And even now, most people don't know the truth, because this was only the beginning. Level 2. Columbia, February 1st, 2003. The shuttle Columbia was returning from a 16-day mission. Research, experiments, routine. The crew was experienced and spirits were high. They were only minutes from home. Everything seemed normal until the shuttle reached the skies over Texas. But what no one knew was that the damage had already been done. Suddenly, it broke apart. Debris streaked across the sky like falling stars. But those weren't stars. That was the shuttle disintegrating. The cause was a hole in the wing, created at launch by a chunk of foam insulation. It went unnoticed, but during re-entry, superheated air over 3,000 degrees poured into the breach. The structure failed. The shuttle tore itself apart. The crew likely had seconds, maybe moments. We'll never know exactly what they saw or felt, only that they never made it home. What rained down wasn't just debris, it was broken trust in our ability to master space. But here's the disturbing part. The breakup didn't happen instantly. Crew members likely survived for 30 to 60 seconds as the shuttle disintegrated. Emergency oxygen packs were activated and helmets were on. Data shows they were still trying to control the vehicle, still trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. Some may have lost consciousness quickly from cabin depressurization, others not so fast. The violence of the breakup ripped through the shuttle into thousands of pieces, spreading wreckage across hundreds of miles. And yet, they tried. Columbia's crew was composed of some of the best. Commander Rick Husband, pilot William McCool, Kalpana Chawla. Elon Ramon was the first Israeli astronaut. David Brown, Laurel Clark, Michael Anderson. They were nearly home. Their families were waiting. Their children had made welcome back signs. NASA expected touchdown at 9:16 a.m. Instead, they got static. The haunting thing about Columbia isn't just that it happened, it's that it could have been prevented. Foam strikes had occurred before, but no one thought they were lethal until 7 people were torn from the sky while conscious. Soyuz 1, he entered his own coffin and closed the hatch himself. Vladimir Komarov knew he was going to die, and yet he flew. Vladimir Komarov was no rookie. He was a seasoned cosmonaut, brave and brilliant. But in 1967, politics overruled safety. Soyuz 1 was rushed, flawed, untested, and unfinished. Engineers reportedly found over 200 design problems, but the mission was greenlit anyway. Why? Because the Kremlin had planned a grand celebration, a PR stunt. Komarov would launch, orbit, and return. Then Yuri Gagarin, his backup and close friend, would fly next. Komarov knew the risks. According to leaked KGB documents, he told colleagues, "If I don't fly, they'll send Yuri, and he'll die instead." Komarov didn't simply accept death, he chose it to protect his best friend. The launch was chaotic. Systems failed, panels didn't deploy. The spacecraft tumbled uncontrollably through orbit. Komarov tried everything. He cursed, he cried, and he also stayed calm. Ground control heard it all. On re-entry, the parachutes failed. The backup chute tore like paper. He was coming in at full speed in a sealed metal coffin. When Soyuz 1 hit Earth, the capsule crumpled like a can. Inside, his body was unrecognizable. An open casket funeral was held, but only his scorched remains lay beneath the flag. He didn't scream in fear. He screamed in rage at the engineers who warned them, at the politicians who ignored them, at a country that buried him under flags. Instead of truth, Vladimir Komarov didn't die in a crash. He died knowing this wasn't an accident. It was a sacrifice, not to space, but to pride. Level 3. Soyuz 11. Humanity had never lived in space until now. In June 1971, the Soviet Soyuz 11 mission made history. 3 cosmonauts, Georgy Dobrovolsky, Viktor Patsayev, and Vladislav Volkov, successfully boarded the Salyut-1 space station and stayed for 23 days. It was a groundbreaking mission. They conducted experiments, measurements, and proved long-term space habitation was possible. And then it was time to come home. The undocking went smoothly, and re-entry procedures were routine. The capsule streaked through the atmosphere and parachutes deployed. From the outside, it looked perfect, but inside the capsule, no one was moving. When recovery crews reached the craft and opened the hatch, they were met with silence. The cabin was intact, with no damage and a warm interior, but the crew was lifeless. All 3 had died during the descent. Blood darkened their faces. There were no signs of trauma, no crash, just stillness. The cause was almost invisible. One valve, the size of a coin. It opened during separation. It wasn't supposed to, but when it did, the air left. In under 30 seconds, the capsule turned into a vacuum. Their blood boiled, their lungs collapsed. They died with their eyes open, all for not wearing pressure suits. They didn't burn, they didn't crash, they suffocated. Dobrovolsky had unstrapped himself, perhaps in a desperate attempt to seal the leak. Patsayev's hands were locked on the controls. Volkov's body was frozen mid-motion. They were conscious just long enough to realize what was happening and powerless to stop it. Blood vessels burst in their eyes, lungs collapsed, and skin tightened, and not a sound could escape their throats. The mission had made history, but ended in silence. Their deaths were kept quiet at first, a national tragedy carefully managed by Soviet authorities. The official cause was decompression during re-entry, but those 30 seconds of knowing, of grasping, of dying slowly, still echo today. They survived the station and space, but a tiny valve, no bigger than a coin, ended everything. It was the air, just leaving. Flight to the edge of hell. Michael Adams flew something most people wouldn't even dare to imagine. Not a plane, a rocket with wings. The X-15 wasn't designed to land. It was designed to push the edge of reality. But something went wrong. An electrical failure sent the guidance system haywire. Adams's ship began to yaw and then spin. The X-15 started rolling violently, Mach 5 at the edge of the atmosphere. He was still conscious and still fighting. Then the plane nosedived, tumbling, spiraling, falling. The structure couldn't take it. The X-15 disintegrated mid-air at nearly 4,000 miles per hour. They found pieces of the aircraft scattered across the Mojave Desert. They found Adams's body, strapped in, still in his seat. He died reaching where no man had dared fly, and yet, outside of flight logs and one plaque, he's almost forgotten. He earned his astronaut wings, and then he fell all the way back to Earth. Bondarenko. Valentin Bondarenko trained beside Yuri Gagarin. He was young, brilliant, destined for the stars. But in March 1961, inside a sealed chamber filled with pure oxygen, history took a darker turn. He was conducting a medical test. removed a small alcohol swab, dropped it on a hot plate. Flames ignited instantly. Fire exploded around him. He was trapped inside a metal box, and outside, no one could open the chamber without depressurizing. It was too late. He died 16 hours later, fully conscious, asking if he'd still be allowed to fly. The Soviets erased him. No obituaries, no official statement, photos removed, documents redacted. His death wasn't acknowledged for 25 years. He never left the ground, but he still burned for space. Some were erased from history, some never returned, and some might still be out there, silent, orbiting, waiting. Level 4. Theodore Freeman. He was NASA's golden boy. Chosen in 1963, Theodore Freeman was one of the rising stars of the space race. Calm, skilled, destined for Apollo. But fate doesn't care about potential. On October 31st, 1964, Freeman took off in his T-38 training jet. It was routine, clear skies, smooth air, until a single bird hit the canopy.
Here comes a bull. I've got the aircraft. You got it. Good deal. Run your seat down. Run your seat down. It's coming down.
The windshield shattered. Glass and feathers exploded inside the cockpit. Jet fuel misted. Visibility gone. He tried to land, but the engines failed. He ejected too low. The chute didn't have time to deploy. He struck the ground 100 yards from safety. They buried him with honors, but barely anyone remembers. He was replaced quietly in the Apollo lineup. His name disappeared under bigger names. A bird ended a dream that could have reached the moon. Not all space deaths happen in space. Some never leave the runway. Clifton Williams. Clifton Williams was one seat away from walking on the moon. He trained beside Armstrong, Aldrin, and Lovell. He was backup for Apollo 9 and next in line. October 5th, 1967, another routine T-38 flight. Destination? Houston. But something went wrong. The jet's control system failed mid-air. It pitched downward, no warning. He tried to eject, but the plane was upside down. His parachute didn't have enough space. He slammed into the ground outside Tallahassee, Florida. He died instantly. No ceremony, no moment of silence on TV. NASA just moved on. He could have been the sixth man on the moon. Instead, his mission patch never launched. His suit stayed zipped. His chair was given to someone else. He got one ride, and it ended in silence. Some astronauts vanish from memory, and some were never meant to be remembered. Laika, the first orbital victim. In the early days of space exploration, humans hadn't yet ventured into orbit, so they sent a dog, a stray plucked from the streets of Moscow, with no say in the matter. On November 3rd, 1957, Laika, a small terrier mix, was placed inside Sputnik 2, the Soviet Union's second spacecraft. She was set to orbit the Earth, alone. She wasn't the first to be launched, but she was the first to experience the emptiness of space. The plan was simple. Laika would circle the Earth, and the Soviets would learn how the human body might handle weightlessness. But there was no plan for her to come back. Laika's capsule was sealed tightly. Inside, the temperature quickly rose to unbearable levels. The stress from the flight, combined with the heat, began to suffocate her. Her body shook uncontrollably, a result of the extreme conditions, but she could not escape. By the time Sputnik 2 completed its 13th orbit, Laika was already dead. She never made it back home. Laika wasn't the first living being in space. She was the first victim of space, erased from history as an experiment. Her sacrifice marked a dark chapter in our pursuit of the stars. If this is what level 4 has, then you might not be ready for level 5 at all. Level 5. Robert Lawrence. In the early days of NASA's space program, there was a man who was destined to be the first African-American astronaut. Robert Lawrence, a military pilot. had all the qualities to become an astronaut: skill, intelligence, and a passion for exploration. In 1967, NASA selected Lawrence for the Manned Orbital Laboratory program, paving the way for him to become the first African American in space. But Robert Lawrence never made it to the stars. Tragically, just 2 months before his scheduled spaceflight, Lawrence died in a plane crash. On December 8, 1967, his T-33 jet went down during a training mission. He was only 32 years old. His death was not just a loss to his family and friends, but to the history of space exploration. The mission he was supposed to lead was abandoned. He was swept under the rug, forgotten by the very institution that had once chosen him. The tragedy of Robert Lawrence was not just his untimely death, but erasure of his legacy. A man who could have helped break barriers, forever lost to the dark silence of space history. Yuri Gagarin.
Мои самые большие планы, самые заветные мечта — это еще раз, если позволит и здоровье, и, так сказать, мои способности, деловые качества, и не раз побывать в космическом пространстве, слетать туда, посмотреть побольше, слетать на другие планеты.
Yuri Gagarin, the first human to fly into space, the man who took humanity's first step beyond our planet's atmosphere, a hero, a symbol of Soviet pride. But there is something about his death that doesn't add up. Gagarin, the man who had conquered space, died far too young. On March 27, 1967, just 6 years after his historic flight, Gagarin died in a plane crash. His MiG-15 jet went down during a routine training mission. But here's the strange part. Official reports say it was a simple accident. The plane encountered turbulence and crashed, but no one believes it. Not entirely. For years, rumors have swirled around Gagarin's death. Some claim that he was in a forced crash by the Soviet government, his life snuffed out in silence. Others believe the pilot who was with him had panicked, leading to the fatal incident. Gagarin had become a global icon. He was too valuable to be left to die in obscurity. So, the Soviet government buried the truth, wrapped it up in silence. Yuri Gagarin's death was an absurd tragedy that was shrouded in official silence. A man who should have lived forever, erased from the history he helped create. The Lost Cosmonauts. Before Yuri Gagarin was hailed as the first man in space, others went up, but they never came down. That's the rumor, and it's haunted the space community for decades. The Lost Cosmonauts theory suggests that the Soviet Union, desperate to beat the US in the space race, secretly sent multiple astronauts into orbit. But when missions failed, they were erased, vanished from photos, and deleted from history. In 1960, Italian brothers Achille and Giovanni Giudicia Cordelia, amateur radio operators, claimed they intercepted strange Soviet transmissions. One caught a panicked voice repeating, "I'm hot, I can see a flame." Another, a female cosmonaut, begging,
"Why don't you answer? I am dying."
No mission was ever officially acknowledged. No bodies were ever recovered, but the signals were real. Photos have surfaced over the years, training shots of people who don't appear in any Soviet records. Early Soviet engineers, when asked off the record, gave haunting answers. There were others. Soviet secrecy wasn't just political, it was surgical. If a cosmonaut died before being publicly announced, they were wiped. We'll never know how many died, or even who. Maybe it's propaganda, maybe it's real. But in a regime that erased failure and broadcast only victory, the truth may still be floating, silent and frozen somewhere in the void. Level 6. NASA Protocol. There's a plan NASA doesn't like to talk about. It's not in the documentaries, not in the welcome brochures, but it exists. The No Return Protocol. If an astronaut is too far gone, if a rescue is impossible, if bringing them home risks the crew or the mission, there's a quiet rule. Leave them. It's unspoken, rarely acknowledged, but very real. In deep space, you cannot turn around. You cannot risk everyone for one. And the math doesn't lie. NASA trains astronauts for the unthinkable. What to do if a crewmate floats away, if life support fails, if the air runs out. Some protocols even describing sealing the body, or, if needed, ejecting it into space. No funerals, no return, just silence, just a body orbiting forever. And worst of all, you might still be conscious for minutes, maybe longer, drifting, watching your ship grow smaller, knowing this is it. They call it no return, but for that astronaut, it's worse. It's knowing that Earth is behind you and no one is coming.